Well, good morning. Good morning. Is anyone out there? Oh, that's much better. Thank you. Thank you. Third meeting of the Advancing Forestry Study Committee. And we've got a great turnout here. We've also got some folks online. I'll talk about them as well. But I want to thank everyone for being here. It is your participation, not only from the speakers that come and bring expertise for those of us on the committee to sit and listen and learn, but others that are here encourage us that there is a sufficient interest in what we are doing, and that encourages all of us. So I thank you to the presenters who will speak to us a little later today. Thank you to the committee members. A special thank you to Katie Childers. Katie, where are you? And Delta. I know I have violated rule number 1 by starting late, right? Because Delta's always on time, and I'm sorry for that. But blame me for that. But we're ready to go now. So thanks very much. Let me ask each person of our committee to introduce themselves. Chairman Ginn, introduce yourself, please.
Great to be here. All the security folks downstairs, I think they have my ID. I'm still Frank Ginn. I'm still a senator from the 47th district. Good to be with you this morning.
Right. Oh, Chairman.
You want me to turn this on or no?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate your leadership on this issue. Appreciate everybody being here. It's an honor to get to be at Delta headquarters, man. We appreciate what Delta means to our state, all the jobs you provide and how you get us safely from point A to point B. My name is Russ Goodman, and I have the honor of serving as the chairman of the Senate Ag Committee. I'm from way down in South Georgia, a little place called Cogdale, blueberry farmer. And in the timber business, we actually are in the reforestation business. So this is something that's near and dear to my heart, trying to find new markets for wood. We're growing 50% more wood today than we're utilizing. And I can tell you, I wish that we had a huge SAF plant right now going, because my family, after the hurricane, we're cutting 600 acres that normally we would have gotten about $20 a ton for it. But because it's storm damaged, we're getting about 5. So, we definitely want to grow our industry and grow the markets, because we see mills shut down. But I wanted to just take this opportunity as well, seeing as we're at Delta headquarters. My mom and I took a trip, I guess a year or 2 ago now, and we went to Israel, and we landed in Israel on October the 6th, and the war broke out on October the 7th. And so we found ourselves in a mess, needless to say. And we ended up having to, the airport in Tel Aviv was shut down because of missiles and all that. We had to sort of escape Israel through Jordan, and ended up flying out of the airport in Amman. And Katie, I want to thank you for, I don't know how many times we texted throughout that whole ordeal. And also, I don't know Jesse. I've spoken with him several times on the phone, but he was a huge help as well in getting myself and my mother out. And I'll be eternally grateful to you and to Delta Airlines for everything y'all did to help us get out of the country. And I just wanted to say that. So thank you. It's an honor to be here, and look forward to the meeting.
Great. Thank you, Senator.
Good morning. Good morning. I'm Senator Sonia Halpern, representing District 39. Glad to be here again. I'm going to piggy off a little bit on what my colleague just said, and say, with the devastation of the hurricanes, just a quick moment of thanks to our Georgia Forestry Association and all of the other folks who have been coming together to help resolve the problems that we've had. I'm in Atlanta. So in my neighborhood, we had flooding, there were people whose basements flooded up to 9 feet of water, but we did not have the kind of devastation in other parts of the state. So just an acknowledgement to the industry for the work it's done, along with every other kind of emergency preparedness organization that has come to the rescue of folks. My only Delta story is that my children, I've got 3 kids, we only fly Delta. My kids are like, what would it be like to fly on other airplanes? And then I show them the terrible stories of other airplanes. And I'm like, this is why we only fly Delta. We are definitely supporters of our hometown airline. So glad to be here and can't wait for the discussions today.
Thank you, Senator. And I hope you caught the dates that Chairman Goodman said, that when he traveled on the 6th of October, war broke out on the 7th. That explains why no one in our caucus wants to travel with him anymore. He has trouble getting travel partners, and maybe your family will still go. But no, thank you. Thanks to all of you. And Chairman Walker is with us. And Chairman Walker, good morning. Can you hear us?
I can. Good morning. What a beautiful set. I wish I was there in
Go ahead.
person.
I was just going to say thank you for the message you left me yesterday. I know that you wanted to be here, but you have obligations at home that you have to be there for. And just want to give you the floor as well to introduce yourself, and thank you for appearing by Zoom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Larry Walker, Senate District 20, which is 8 counties across Middle Georgia. Chair of the Insurance and Labor Committee in the State Senate, and wish I could be there with you in person. The set is very beautiful and impressive, and I would love to have seen that, but appreciate your understanding and accommodating me to be able to join you virtually.
Absolutely. Thank you. So that, along with myself, round out the committee that's working here for you and working for the Senate. I'm John Kennedy. I represent the 18th District, which is 6 counties in Middle Georgia, including parts of Bibb and Houston County and all of Peach, Crawford, Monroe, and Upson. And I also have the privilege of serving the folks that are before you that serve in the Senate as the President Pro Tem of the Senate. And with stemming from a trip that was taken about a year ago now, and several other things that have come to our attention about the needs with sustainable aviation fuel and the forestry industry and the intersection of that we'll talk a little more about later, came an idea that maybe we ought to have a study committee. And so I hope that what you've seen is an evolution of the discussion of this topic, beginning with, of course, advancing forestry study and talking about that industry. And we focused on that. We began with our first meeting there in Forsyth, Georgia, in my district, where the Georgia Forestry Commission, or Georgia Forestry Association, rather, is located. And then we have gravitated towards some of the issues that are beyond just the initial challenges that are faced by the forestry industry. And of course, all of that has been overlaid by what happened with the storm of recent. And and we're going to talk about that. And I'm going to ask Jake Matthews to come up in a few minutes and address that as well. But before we do, wanted to also thank my staff. I want to thank Senate Press, who's here, who's live streaming this. Thank y'all for that. And Charlie Barrett, my Chief of Staff, James Bill, my General Counsel, and Oswald Hernandez in my office. And who else we got, Oswald? I can't see. And Kaylee, yes, in the back. Great. Thank you, Kaylee. Thank y'all for making sure this got put together and the logistics of it work. I want to highlight, before we move on, the damage to the forestry industry caused by Hurricane Helene. About a week after Helene made landfall, I had the opportunity, at the invitation of my good friend, Senator Goodman, to join the Forestry Commission on a survey of the damage to our state, at least from Macon down south toward to Clinch County, and where Charlie and I got to see it from the air. Got to speak to various local officials there in Clinch County who talked about the damage, who talked about the needs that they had from an infrastructure standpoint, but also talk about what some of the long-term projected impacts of the storm was going to have on rural Georgia. Yes, largely on the forestry industry, but not just contained within that industry. You know, what I witnessed was a truly heartbreaking scene, and I know many in this room have seen either the photographs and many have seen it personally, and I'm sure you have the same reaction. The forestry industry in Georgia is wrestling with a generational impact that this storm has had on the livelihoods and, importantly, the communities that not only are forestry based, but also just in the rural part of our state that this has touched so significantly because of the devastation that, quite frankly, many of us thought was not ever possible. GEMA informed me that the storm, Hurricane Helene, brought sustained winds reaching of 120 miles an hour, which caused widespread blowdowns, uprootings, and breakage of so much of our forestry industry, and not just pine trees when we think of forest, but pecan groves and so many other aspects that were touched. The Forestry Commission has conducted initial assessments and found that the Helene's path of devastation traversed a staggering 8.9 million acres of our timberland here in Georgia. Approximately 37% of the timberland in Georgia was touched or impacted some way by the storm. The impact is significant, and a conservative estimate of the total loss of our timber resources alone is approaching a staggering $3 billion. To put this in perspective, Hurricane Michael in 2018 affected around 2.4 million acres of timberland and resulted in a loss of timber of about $760 million. All these are bad and staggering numbers, but I wanted you to have that to put it in perspective. Landowners are working tirelessly to salvage what they can from their timberland, but unfortunately, this has led to an oversupply. And the Georgia Forestry Association expects a significant drop in prices, as Chairman Goodman just talked about what he has seen just within his family impact. Reports from Forest indicate that some landowners are receiving as little as $2 to $3 per ton for the salvage wood, roughly just about 10% of the current price of pine saw timber stumpage prices in Georgia. The impact of Hurricane Helene extends beyond the timberland itself. This has significantly impacted our mills, considering the capacity that they were operating at before and trying to make adjustments with the supply and demand issues. Now that's been turned on its head with an oversupply, and they're trying to do what they can to manage through, even with quota systems, to make sure that they can handle what is coming in of this significant influx of wood that's coming into the mills and that's making its way to the market. These statistics and economic indicators are quite frankly grim, and it makes this work of this committee all the more important. And I would beg our committee members, as I know this has our attention, as we will be talking to our Senate colleagues about the work of this committee as we resume the work of the Senate in January. But I want to thank all of you for your support on this committee. And that's why I want to give Jake Matthews the floor for just about 5 minutes. Jake, if you would come forward with Georgia Forestry Association with a few minutes to elaborate basically what GFA is seeing on the ground. And again, the progression of the work of this study committee is what we have described, but the impact of this is such that I think it's worth all of us taking just a few minutes to hear where we are right now. Jake, you have the floor. Thank you for being here.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Thanks for letting me join you here this morning, and really thank you also just for the work of this committee. We've been talking to our members over the past few months as this committee's been doing its work, and I would say that our membership and a lot of others, as shown by the group here, they're pretty excited about some of the things that y'all are looking at and working on, especially at a time like this. What you see on the screen here is basically just kind of an initial glimpse at what we're seeing all across that eastern side of the state, all the way from Valdosta up to Augusta. And Mr. Pro Tem, you just touched on it, but the numbers, really conservative estimates that are coming out from the Georgia Forestry Commission show that the damages, direct damages to timberland from Hurricane Helene are at about $1.28 billion. And that's very significant. And you just pointed out the numbers from Hurricane Michael, which I think really puts it into perspective, which was about $760 million. So this storm certainly, at least for forestry, and I would say for other commodities and communities as well, could be even more devastating than Hurricane Michael was. The storm hit an area of the state that has a really high carrying capacity. So the damage per acre is going to be higher from a financial perspective just because of how many tons of wood are on each individual acre. That's another differentiating factor from, say, something like Hurricane Michael. That basically means that someone with just a couple hundred acres, a smaller acreage number, is going to see significant financial losses as a result of the storm. And of course, we've seen damage way over just a couple hundred acres. You mentioned it traversed over 8.9 million acres. There's a chance that only really 15% of what's on the ground will even be salvaged. And that really has to do with a lot of different factors, has to do with the market conditions you just touched on. And so with that, you also have just astronomical cost to clean up something like you see on the screen here. Costs such, I mean, we're hearing things like $2,000, $2,500, even $3,000 an acre to go in, clean up what you see, and then actually get it back into forest production. So that's a really significant cost for someone, and it weighs heavily into the decision of whether or not they're going to replant. So that's something that folks are taking into consideration right now. The impact is certainly not limited to just landowners. You've already touched on it. Some of these communities, forestry is all there is, and the greater ag economy is all there is. And so when you have something like this hit some of these communities, it is a significant generational impact, like you've already said. And as you already know from the work that the committee's been doing, we were already dealing with very bad market conditions. And so something like this is just going to speed that up. It really turns the volume up on what kind of conditions we were already seeing, and it's worsened them really. Forestry is unique in that there's not a lot of options in place right now at the state and federal level from a recovery standpoint. There is some stuff at the federal level that deals with reforestation. And so folks are looking at that right now, working through FSA, but we're looking forward to working with y'all on the short-term things that can help forestry recover from this. But the work of your committee is going to do so much more than that in really helping the long-term success and recovery of our forestry sector in Georgia. I'm going to just play a quick clip here, which we should be able to just click on that last slide there, and it should play. It's only about 1.5 minutes long, but it'll show you some of the damage from a video perspective, some drone, well, I hear it, but I don't see it.
In our area where we're at, we've always been pretty safe. We've only lost maybe 500-600 acres to fire over the last 30 years. You know, we have I have fire tractors, bulldozers, the forestry's right here. We do a lot of burning to keep our fire danger down. So there's things you can do to help that. But as far as a hurricane this strong coming through here, nobody's ever seen it. You lose it. If it's a tornado, wind, flood, fire, we have no protection. Zero. And that's got to change. We need something to protect our forest land and to make us want to keep our forest land.
The landowners are pretty downtrodden, losing the vastness of timber that we've lost. And, not quite sure folks will be putting wood back into timberland, which is a travesty. I hope that we can figure out ways to incentivize and encourage our landowners to replant their timber.
Quality of the video seemed to be a little bit off, but at least you got to hear from some of those folks, just some initial thoughts from those landowners that are seeing really widespread significant damage. And that second landowner there on the screen, we got to go visit with him in person and see what it looked like on the ground. And it is pretty devastating. So we look forward to working with y'all throughout the rest of this committee and over the next few months, but be happy to take questions. But other than that, I'll turn it over.
Hey, Jake, any questions on the committee? Yes, Chairman Goodman.
One thing I just, from talking to members that I serve with in the Senate, there's one thing that I think that we need to clarify just for folks listening in and folks that maybe don't understand our industry, but that $1.3 billion loss, there is no insurance for that. So, there is no federal crop insurance program for timber. And so, where I live at, I can't tell you how many people, I live in the #1 forestry county in the state. 95% of our county is covered in timberland. And there are a lot of people that their retirements and their hopes for their children's future and grandchildren's future are tied up in that timber. And now, we're talking about people that don't have big 401ks and stock accounts. They're literally their life is their land and their timberland, and it's all gone. So that's something that I do worry about it getting planted back, and what older folks that their dream was to fund their retirement and pass it down to the next generation. I hope that they can continue to keep it in their family, and I hope that we can come up with policies that will incentivize that, because it's not only about those families and those communities, but the 144,000 people that work in the forestry industry and the tax digest, y'all. I was meeting with a bunch of my superintendents back home last week, and that's one of the things I talked about is, it is hard to grow a tract of timber for 20 or 25 years and have a hurricane and pay taxes, pay property taxes on that land for 25 years and then lose it all. And you hope just to get enough out of it to get it planted back and then pay taxes on that land for another 20 or 25 years. So I just wanted to clarify that in case anyone out there thought that there was about to be a big insurance payment or something like that. So thank you, Jake.
Yep, thank you. Well said. It's certainly a very acute problem with the insurance side of it. There's just not a lot of options for that in today's marketplace for timber. So that's not something that these folks are going to be have as at their disposal to try and recover. So thank you for bringing that up.
Jake, one question and really a follow-up because you mentioned this. And I know one of the most arresting ideas that was shared with me about the challenges that is being faced by landowners right now. And you mentioned it, but it's worth saying again so folks understand. And that is to take the land on which all the where the trees have been knocked down in the pictures that you see, the cleanup cost just to prepare that land so that it can be replanted is not something that's in your typical pro forma when you're running the numbers as a timber farmer.
That's exactly right.
And some of the numbers that we've heard, and I've had other friends in the industry that I've talked to and that have called me and I've called them, some of the numbers that they're seeing for potential cleanup cost exceed the anticipated revenue that the farmer would expect at the harvest time, even for multiple harvests. That's hard to get around. But anything you'd care to add to that, I think that really rounds out a little bit the understanding of the challenge to be able to do some of the things that I hope we're going to be working for, like Chairman Goodman referenced. That's a big hurdle. It doesn't mean we can't find a solution, but folks need to be aware of it.
Absolutely. Typically, what you would see is right now anywhere from $300 to maybe $450 in a normal time to go back in and replant. And Chairman Goodman, you may be able to add to that or correct me on that, but that's typically what you see. And what you'll have is a landowner who harvests a tract, and some of the income they get off that tract is what they use to put back into the replanting efforts. Well, with someone that's had their entire tract wiped out, there is no income to then go and do the replanting. And if you're staring a $2,500 an acre bill in the face to try and go and clean that tract up and replant it, you're going to have someone look at that and say, this is not for me anymore. So that's what we want to have not take place. And that's what we're going to try and work towards helping landowners in Georgia with that. And not only that, but with our surrounding states too. A lot of other good state forestry associations that we're working with on that. So thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah. Jake, thank you. Yes, sir. Absolutely.
I just wanted to add also, when I referenced that about being able to hopefully get enough off of the salvage cut to plant it back, keep in mind, after Hurricane Michael, there was only 19% of those storm damaged acres that were harvested. And the footprint of this storm is what, 5 times as much. Jake, I love you. I think it'll be less than 15%. I personally think it could be less than 10% because we don't have the logging base or the mill base to handle all that. And so if you're in that group that does not get it harvested before the wood goes bad, you're talking about a tremendously expensive job trying to get that reforested. You're talking about having to take bulldozers with naval yard chains where they run together and pull chains across and just try to start by knocking it all down. It's a tremendous cost. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Yep.
Jake.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jake. Appreciate your presentation. So we're going to move on. This committee's been dedicated to learning about key economic fundamentals in the Georgia forestry industry. Since our first meeting, this committee sought to identify the economic challenges facing the forestry industry and explore potential solutions to address those challenges that we started out talking about pre-storm. For those of you following along at home, we've heard the concerns of shrinking markets from the organized representatives of the industry in Georgia. We verified these concerns by listening to local foresters, big and small, and we ended our last meeting with a hearing from companies working to create markets for foresters to sell their products. During our last meeting, our impressive partner at Rewood kicked off the conversation by discussing the Renewable Bioproducts Institute, RBI, that's housed at Georgia Tech. And RBI is the first of its kind research center dedicated to exploring new uses for plant-based materials, including timber, to create a variety of high-demand industrial products. We then got to hear from Jamestown LLP, which showcased not only their impressive commitment to our state, by building their headquarters in Atlanta, but also portray the practical and efficiency-based benefits of using Georgia-grown mass timber for commercial construction. Lastly, we heard from Gulfstream and our friends there, whose next generation fleet of aircraft showcases remarkable advancements in fuel efficiency. Gulfstream relayed their commitment to the emerging market of sustainable aviation fuel, an innovation that has a lot of people within the forestry industry very excited. This meeting will have two themes today. We will hear first from leaders in another emerging market of forestry products, sustainable aviation fuel. Our presenters in this space include some of Georgia's largest employers, many of whom have taken significant steps to make this emerging market a reality. Additionally, we will hear from our partners at the Georgia Chamber, as well as the Georgia Department of Economic Development, about what Georgia is doing to recruit and retain similar industries throughout our state. With one meeting left for our committee, I just wanted to say thank you again to our members for all who have participated, as well as all of you who have come to multiple of our meetings as well. We have heard from a diverse spectrum of experts this summer in talking about this issue, and I'm very eager this morning to continue that and hear about how we can take what we have learned and highlight Georgia's position as a leader in forestry innovation. I feel that the work of this committee will lead to solutions that will lead not only to benefit Georgia foresters, but could benefit and drive economic growth for this state in ways that we need it most. So let's get on with our program, as they say, because I want the purpose of this to be focused on depicting why Georgia can be a nationwide leader in this sector that we've been discussing, and also portray how Georgia and why Georgia has courted economic development in this regard. Lastly, we'll also discuss, and as will be important in the discussions going forward, as will be of interest to probably everyone hearing this, would be the future state of incentives and effectiveness and the regulatory framework about this entire industry and how we move forward. So with that, I want to call on Ben Chambers. Ben, thank you for being here. If you'll come up, please. Ben is with RIAM. He is Executive Director of RIAM, which is associated, as he can give us the corporate structure, with Rayonier Advanced Materials. It's a timberland real estate investment trust with assets located with some of the most productive softwood timber growing throughout the U.S. and New Zealand as well. So, Ben, thank you for being here, and I'll give you the floor.
Thank you, Senator.
I don't think so. Can we? It is working? Okay, there we go.
Thank you, Senator. Yeah, so thank you all for coming, allowing me to present. I was actually not expecting to go first, so you guys caught me off guard, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. No, I've got my notes. I was just I thought Ms. DeLuca was going first, so I was trying to sort of detail my notes for how to follow Delta talking about sustainable aviation fuel.
Gathering your thoughts and looking at your notes. The seed for the idea for this study committee really came from a trip about a year ago that, Ben, I think you largely put together and invited several folks on. And we got to see in areas that associated and a plant owned by your company, the company that you work for, how they are turning, using wood-based products as the feedstock to produce SAF. And it was there that I learned what the initials SAF stood for, and came back and thought, wait a minute, as y'all have probably heard me say, wow, understanding the regulatory framework that is driving the need for SAF from an economic standpoint, probably in a very imbalanced fashion, but nonetheless, that is what it is. And so we've got, with the forestry industry being what it is in the state of Georgia, with the world's busiest at times and maybe all times now airport, and then what a fantastic corporate partner for our state with Delta and what it means. The three of those coming together ought to create some fertile opportunities for maybe Georgia to lead in this issue. So Ben, thank you for the trip that you put together, and that's kind of put together the seeds for this. So with that, I'll pitch it back to you.
Absolutely. So RIAM, or Rayonier Advanced Materials, headquartered in Jacksonville, Florida. Just a little bit about us and in the industry itself. So global supplier of specialty cellulose solutions. So we're taking trees, we're putting them through a process to essentially extract the pure cellulose out of that. We're selling that to primarily chemical companies around the world. We have, 4 world-class production facilities, US, Canada, and France. The markets that we're serving there goes into, things like plastics, construction materials, filtration, food, pharmaceuticals. The global pulp and paper market's about 70 million tons. We're operating at the very tip of that pyramid in, that specialty cellulose area. We view kind of the sort of the role of sustainability and kind of the growth into the future, right? That's a huge opportunity for us. We're already, taking trees and turning into products and all the benefits that come with that. But how do we get more out of that? Our operations create a market for about 2 million acres of forest land today. Now that's assuming sort of standard growth cycles and things like that. Obviously we're in a different, situation right now with Helene. So, we'll see where that comes, but I'm going to go into next slide here. So this is just, again, a little bit more about the business, kind of our business model. And we have on the screen essentially our existing business model, and then, what we're looking to grow into in the future. So, taking trees from sustainable working forest, turning that into chips. We consume those in our pulp mills, digesters. We eventually turn that into the specialty cellulose that we sell those customers around the world. So that's roughly 40% of the tree. If you look at the top in the blue boxes, light blue, roughly a pine tree is 40% cellulose. Historically, the other 60% of a tree we've burned for its energy value. So that goes into a recovery boiler, produce steam, spin a turbine. If we can find higher and better uses for that other 60%, that's just, value added on top. We talk about landowners needing more outlets. I know you guys have discussed more outlets for selling timber, but we also want to make sure that the existing outlets remain viable long into the future. Over the past couple of years, we've seen 3 or 4 pulp mills in the U.S. Southeast shut down, right? Those have had a devastating impact on those local economies. We want to make sure that doesn't happen. So our flagship facility is actually in Jesup, Georgia, Wayne County, Southeast Georgia. I mentioned Canada and France. So Temiskaming, about 4 hours north of Toronto, and then south of France, kind of Bordeaux area. The other kind of the future for us, that's our existing business. What we want to do in the future is highlighted in orange on the screen. So we're going to talk about SAF today. I know there's a lot of presenters going to talk about that. I did want to hit one other topic first, which is additional biomass energy. So you guys see where it says AGE there, Altamahaw Green Energy. So this is a joint venture between RYAM and Beasley Green Power. Next screen. So we were recently granted a 30-year power purchase agreement by the Public Service Commission. This came out of a RFP that Georgia Power put together, seeking additional green energy or biomass-based energy. We view this as a great opportunity for our Jesup site, in addition to all the timberland around there and the ability to work with Beasley, which was already one of our primary suppliers for fiber. Their extensive forest products infrastructure, it really just makes a lot of sense. There are a few things, hurdles that we still need to clear before this becomes a reality. But, before we had all the storm damage and the timber on the ground, you have the remnants of harvesting forest products, right? So the sticks, the stems, the treetops, things like that. Those are typically either left in the forest, right? And they would decay on their own. That's going to release methane, and that's not good. Or they're going to be pushed together in a big pile and they're going to be burned so that then they can come back in and plant more trees, right? Clear that land. And so what we envision with this project is we're going to have crews that go out and harvest that on behalf of landowners, at low cost or no cost to a landowner. We're going to take that and we're going to produce green energy out of that. And so it really will support those rural communities. It'll help landowners, incentivize them to plant more trees or replant trees. We're going to, again, burn that in a state-of-the-art recovery bowl or state-of-the-art power boiler, cleaner emissions. It's really a win-win. again, there's a lot of things we have to do to get over, clear a few more hurdles, but we're really looking forward to that project. We get into the SAF space. So I'm sure, you know, others are going to talk about the demand for air travel. It's obviously going to increase over the next 20 years. These are the different sort of technologies that we expect to get there, where you've got your fossil fuels being limited in the future, and then what's going to make that up. So eSAF, sort of power to liquids. This is taking green energy and carbon dioxide, pairing them together. Essentially, it's complicated. We'll get into some more details in a minute, but we expect that that'll be sort of the leading technology in the future. It's being incentivized by the European Union. I mean, there's mandates to force that. So we do expect that that'll be a big portion of it, but there are other options as well. Next slide. These are some of those other ways. Back on the slide when I was sharing our business model, we talked about biosaf or eSAF. So eSAF, again, power to liquids, or biosaf, which would be, you know, taking, you know, producing an ethanol or a methanol and then converting that into a jet fuel. I think Dane's going to talk about LanzaJet later, and that's one of their technologies. So there's, you know, numerous pathways to get there. But, you know, we're looking at the biosaf or eSAF. I will mention here, and what Senator Kennedy referenced in the trip earlier, we have 2 facilities now, one in France that has a 2nd generation bioethanol plant that was commercialized in April of this year. It is taking the residual sugars out of our production process, fermenting those, distilling them out, producing that ethanol. Today it's being sold into, you know, passenger cars, but in the future, with the technology evolving to take, you know, to turn that ethanol into a jet fuel, you know, we view that as a viable pathway. We're looking at a similar project, almost an exact project in our Fernandina Beach, Florida facility. Okay. So if we talk about the different production processes, you know, this gets very technical. I'm not going to try and explain it. And frankly, I'm not sure that you guys can, well, I can't read it over there, but, you know, there's a lot of technologies that we're pairing together here to make this all work. I was speaking to someone out in the lobby and explaining kind of the process we were going through, and they're like, well, that's, you know, there's still a long way to go to prove it out. And we absolutely agree, which is why the support, public policy support, support of the industry itself, and helping us make sure that we can prove this out and get to these solutions will be vital. This is an illustrative example of SAF production, you know, biosaf, so biomass, and then into the alcohol to jet process. Okay. So if we get into the regulatory and policy outlook, there's kind of 2 different pathways here. You've got Europe, they're sort of mandating this. So they're requiring airlines to buy a certain amount of sustainable aviation fuel. And the US side is more of an incentivization structure. So the IRA is offering various incentives. I would say that we see more projects happening in Europe right now. Frankly, we're further along in Europe on that project because we're getting more support from the European government. They're just more engaged, in our opinion. But either way, you know, we hope to see this progress over the next 5 to 10 years, right? A project like this, you know, you're looking at multiple billions of dollars and 5 to 6 years to build one. So we got to get started. More details about the EU SAF policy. So if we look at the different sort of Refuel EU, RED II, RED III, EU energy taxation, and the emissions trading scheme, I point all those out because they're different policies that are mandating it and not always aligned. And so I would like to see, you know, as we're working on this in the US, we need to think about ways to make all of these different policies work together so that it's not so confusing for companies like ours or the airlines to figure out which one's the most incentivizing for them. In Europe, I mentioned we're further along there. So we are working on a pre-feed study. We've got a technology partner identified to help us pull all of those bricks that I mentioned earlier, you know, all the different technologies, help us pull those together and do the front end engineering and design to prove out feasibility of these projects. This is what the U.S. is doing. So U.S. SAF Grand Challenge, Biden administration, 3 billion gallons by 2030, growing to 35 billion gallons by 2050. It's a huge hurdle to get to. And so, some of the other IRA tax credits, grants, and then the renewable fuel standard, this isn't a mandate, right? These are incentives. And so companies have to figure out how to make the incentives work to make the financials work for them. I will say, back talking about our Jessup facility in Georgia, it's roughly 3,000 acres on site. We're, dual serve both class 1 railroads. We have all the infrastructure to make one of these projects work, but we're a long way from actually making it work because of all these complexities that I'm talking about. If we get into the U.S. and the tax credits, this is kind of an overview of the various tax credits. So the Inflation Reduction Act is providing large tax credits. They are incentivizing the SAF production supply chain at various points along the way. Some of them are one-time tax credits. Some of them are annual production tax credits. They're complex stacking rules, so you can't use all of them at the same time. So figuring out, is it better to take, the tax incentives on the front end, right? If you want to get help building the project, that may be possible. But if you do that, then you don't get the, production credits on the back end. And so trying to figure out what works best for a given company, that's kind of where we are right now. If we talk about Georgia, given the scale of these projects, again, multiple billions of dollars, the socioeconomic benefits in Georgia, this wouldn't only be direct contributions from the investments and the operations, but there are broader economic development benefits to rural Georgia. Again, this is primarily going to be, these pulp mills are located primarily in rural areas. If we're talking about forestry, it's primarily rural. We need industry, government, and these communities to take deliberate actions, working together, which is what this committee is all about, to ensure that the communities of Georgia and the economy of Georgia benefits from, this industry, because we're here in Delta's headquarters, right? This industry, I think, is going to succeed. It's just a matter of who's going to participate in it. And we certainly hope to be a part of that. Again, talking about the policy uncertainty. I wasn't at the last meeting, and I missed it was a Georgia Tech event a couple of weeks ago, but I hear that one of the resounding themes coming out of that was around certainty and just figuring out how to get stakeholders to work together, get everyone in a room, which again, I'm so appreciative of being here today, you guys setting this up, but just us having these conversations and talking about, what is possible, working together and finding these solutions for Georgia's economy. That's all I got. Thank you so much.
Ben, thank you. Any questions from the committee? Good job. You answered all our questions. Very nice. Thank you, Ben. Next, I'd like to call on Delta Airlines. Amelia, the Chief Sustainability Officer. And I would go on and on about Delta, but I could talk all day about the great things and what Delta means to our state. We appreciate that. And what a critical player y'all are, and a partner, I would say, in helping us figure out, navigate what this new frontier, dare I say, looks like. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, everyone, as well. And I'm actually really glad Ben went first because he has tree swag on his tie, if you didn't notice. I do not own any tree attire, but perhaps this will go on my holiday list. So, all right, noted. Charlotte from my team is here. You know what is on my list for a holiday gift. So, he is the first representative and the best representative, I think, of what we're trying to do here today. Though very pleased to be here today. And before I talk about staff a little further, I do want to just say on behalf of all of the Delta people, thank you for being here. And more important, Senator Goodman, Jake, everyone who was impacted by the recent hurricane, just want to say that our thoughts are with you as well. We're talking about something really, really long-term today with staff, but I think it's always a miss to not come back to the moment in time and the challenges that people face day in and day out. So I love staff. I'm watching my time because I will cut myself off at some point because I care deeply about this issue. Let's go to the next slide, please. And as we're flipping in I will go to the next slide. Thank you. As we talk about Delta's vision, though, and thank you for all the support of Delta, I did just want to mention Senator Goodman caught me off guard earlier. He said, "Where are you from?" I was like, "Oh, I'm not from Georgia. Shoot." But I will just say to the great state of Georgia, I was married on Jekyll Island. My children were born here and they go to public school here. My husband is pursuing his PhD at UGA right now in Athens. So we are trying our best, Senator Goodman, to try to one day be able to say we are Georgians. We're not there today. But I do want to say, as I travel the world and talk about SAF, I actually haven't had the chance to do it here locally. I've spent time in places like Lansing and Albany, a lot of time in Minneapolis. And so for me, it's just with great pleasure that I can be here today in our home state talking about what is, I think, one of the most important things that we're doing at Delta right now. We believe, you can see our vision here, that there is a future for more sustainable travel experience and net zero emissions. And our consumers also believe that. I think the most important thing to acknowledge today is we are a consumer brand. That's what we bring to the table. We can talk about SAF and we can reach millions of consumers every day in what we do. And our consumers in return are telling us that this is important. 75% of our consumers right now are saying sustainability matters to me. I am making decisions based upon my sustainability principles, and I want to pick an airline in particular that allows me to feel like I am being more sustainable. And that's not just Gen Z. I think that's what surprised us the most in the data. We expected that from Gen Z, but we're seeing it just as equally, if not more, from our premium and our loyal customers. And so that's why you're seeing Delta double down on things that, you know, some of things our customers can't see, like how we land a plane, how we save fuel every day, but also paper cups. We've been very vocal about the fact that we will bring our paper cups on board next year. And does that solve our emissions footprint? Absolutely not. But it takes away that tension that our travelers are telling us, that they say, every day at home, I work really hard to make sure I'm not using single-use plastic so that I'm recycling it. And then I get on board a Delta plane. And unfortunately, I'm feeling that tension where I don't have that choice, or you're not showing me that you're sustainable. And so for us, it goes hand in hand with both bringing our emissions footprint down from our jet fuel usage, as well as having a more sustainable travel experience. This is just demonstrative of that, right? When we talk about sustainability here at Delta, we mean all facets, from our operation to our supply chain, to what you see on the ground, to what you see in the air. Things that touch our jet fuel footprint, which is what you're seeing on the left-hand side here with net zero emissions. So 90% of our impact on the planet does come from jet fuel. So we would be absolutely silly if we didn't take that very seriously and address it. But at the same time, again, the right-hand side is what our 250 million customers every year see. They do not see what's coming out of our tailpipe, but they do see the products that we put in front of them, from both food choices as well as the materials that we're using, to, again, just understanding ways that our supply chain and our ground support equipment is also moving along this journey. There's things like our ground support equipment, you can actually electrify it today. And so we've been working really hard on that. Some of the things that are interesting on the left-hand side, though, on the net zero emissions. So, you know, we're here today talking about SAF, and we're going to talk a lot about why the airline industry needs help. We're going to need help from states. We're going to need help from federal governments. But I also think it's important as a business to build trust, to say that we're also doing what we can do today. And one of the things I'm most proud to talk about is something that we have at Delta called Delta's Carbon Council. And Delta's Carbon Council is led and chaired by John Lauder, who's our Chief Operating Officer, and his direct reports. And every day we just talk about how we can save fuel in what we do. Now, is it going to remove our impact from the 4 billion gallons of jet fuel that we use? It is not. But we make a commitment every year to add on to the fuel that we've saved the year before, with the plan of saving at least 10 million gallons every year, adding on to that every single year. We're actually projected right now to end this year close to 40 to 45 million gallons of jet fuel saved since we started this council a couple of years ago, projecting to smash a goal that we set of 45 million gallons for next year. We think we'll far exceed that. And how are we doing that? Again, there's all sorts of things. Next time you fly on Delta, things you will never see, but you should know, is when the airplane pulls into the gate, for example. Today, often it's powered by a little engine in the back, which is highly inefficient. Let's get that plugged into ground power. Let's work with Georgia Power to make sure we have access to renewable energy in the future. But more importantly, that ratio is like 1 to 100 in terms of efficiency of using that little engine versus using ground power. Similarly, how we land an aircraft can have an immense impact. How we fly through the airspace. Also, we can save millions of gallons of fuel every year. And then, you know, as we bring new aircraft on board, hopefully you will all get a chance to try it someday. The other thing you're never going to see is we're bringing those airplanes on board with less weight. That's a great way that we can get fuel out of our system today. So I just want you all to know, when we talk about trust, it's important that we do what we can do today. SAF, though, is, as was already shown on the slide before, the most important thing as we advance towards net zero. This is somewhat hard to see, but essentially we are, as Ben mentioned, we are a growth industry. And this is the trajectory if we took no action. The dark blue is what's in our control today. That's fleet renewal and things like our Carbon Council, what they lead. And you can see that really only gets you halfway at best to where you're trying to be. And fleet renewal, just, just means a traditional renewal program like we're doing today. So no major step change. Every new aircraft we take today is anywhere between 15 to 20% more fuel efficient, but there's diminishing returns to that because that tube and wing has been around for so long. The engine technology has been around for so long. So when you get into this bottom part, you get into some things that it's a little bit kind of blacked out here, but we do think there will be potentially a new aircraft in the future. It may look different, it may be powered different, but at 2050, that maybe will help impact 5% of our emissions. So the rest is with SAF. And that's why we talk about it in a very obsessed way. It is the only lever that is going to help us advance towards net zero. It's going to allow our industry to grow, but grow in a sustainable way. It can reduce carbon emissions by up to 80%, as I'm sure this committee knows. It can come from a variety of feedstocks. There is no winner to date. There's a lot of people in the game, and I think it's important to start to figure out what's going to work. And you're going to hear again, the colleagues at LanzaJet have been mentioned already. They are making some great progress in the state, which we're all cheering for them. Similarly, I just want to talk about some other things that Delta has done. So as an airline, we don't make the fuel. So we recognize that, but we know an immense amount about it. We try to support the policies that matter the most, and we try to send those demand signals. So we talk a lot about offtakes, which just means that we work with players to try to send those long-term signals that there is an airline at the other side. Similarly, though, more recently, we've taken a really local approach, and that's why we spend time anywhere, like I mentioned, states from New York to Michigan to Minnesota to Nebraska, talking about how local economies can really benefit when a state comes in and puts an incentive in place. We've talked a lot about our Minnesota SAF hub. That represents the entire value chain in the state of Minnesota. So the state put an incentive in place over a year ago. That's a great start, but you still have to build the value chain, as many of my colleagues have discussed. So we are spending a lot of time in Minnesota. That's a different feedstock than the state of Georgia, but similarly, it's the roadmap of what we would implement in Georgia if there was an incentive here. We would look to all the players through the value chain, from both the demand signal as well as the suppliers, to stand up as quickly as possible with very robust goals. So in the state of Minnesota, within 1 year of that legislation being enacted, we have already uplifted a new novel feedstock, SAF, from camelina, which is the winter crop, a winter cover crop. That was announced a couple of weeks ago. We've signed a blending facility, and we plan to uplift in a more scaled fashion by the end of next year. So that's within 2 years of the hub going into place. It's so important, though. I think the economics are really important here from an airline perspective. Just to mention, of course, we are so lucky at Delta that people want to pay to fly on us, and there's a lot of brand loyalty. But that being said, we don't have just massive margins at any given point. And so this product is expensive. I think if you calculated at about $1 premium for every gallon of SAF, if you replaced all of our jet fuel, that would cut our margins in half overnight. And that's at $1 premium. And to get to $1 premium today, you need to stack both federal and state incentives to even get to that $1 premium. And so we've got to have the state level incentives on top of federal to make it work. And even then, there's still that gap to jet parity, which is where we talk about the value chain. We talk about people on the demand and the supply side working to bring that cost curve down, but also provide that certainty on the demand side. So that's where I think this is where the conversation turns to states like Georgia to just talk about what we're doing in other states, what we're seeing in other states, and just talking about the time is now. I love that Ben mentioned it takes a number of years to get these facilities to work. It takes quite a bit of time to figure out a blending structure. That's been a big thing in Minnesota is, okay, once the SAF is produced, how do we get it into the fuel farm in Minnesota? How do we check that all the infrastructure works? How do we make sure that there's a corporate buyer on the other side, not just Delta? Because again, we can't absorb that premium in its totality, but we have business partners in Minnesota. We've got cargo partners, there's private air partners here as well that can help absorb that. And all that just takes a little bit of time. I really believe in the potential, though, of Georgia to be a major player. It's been exciting to see the Midwest come in. And again, that's all kind of got a very similar kind of feedstock with corn. And I think we're all very excited to see the woody biomass conversation start to pick up in more earnest, because I think it's just one that's a little bit of an untapped potential. It similarly will help uplift those communities the way that we've talked about farmers in the Midwest, get that certainty that as on-road electrifies, there is still a use for their product. And I think, again, what is very unfortunate, but what we've seen for the last month is the fact that it just, again, the instability of the market is such that SAF starts to provide a really good, outlet for the product that's coming out of the state. Let me see if there's anything else. I think that's it for me. What questions can I answer, if anything, right now?
I'll ask one if they're thinking, when you were alluding to the,
You were giving us the metrics and the assumed dollar premium, even with the RINs or other
Yep.
credits. Is that dollar premium compared to petro-based fuel as the alternative. Okay.
Correct. The way we talk about SAF today is typically a premium to jet fuel. And so that dollar is that premium to conventional jet fuel today. Now it's illustrative, right? The product modeling costs of SAF do expect it to walk down the cost curve as it scales. But I will just say, frankly, without getting into economics, you can't find a gallon of SAF today at $1 premium above jet. So that's just a little bit of more of our long-term goal to get that product there. And again, it's just a little more illustrative to say that the airline industry itself cannot take that cost burden. It wouldn't work for us or our consumers. What we're seeing in the EU, as Ben mentioned with those mandates, is those sit on top of the producers. And that means that in return, that does come to Delta. But what the EU has led, the EU airlines have led, is that gets pushed to consumers. And I don't know that that's the right answer either, especially in an industry that we believe should have a growth trajectory. More people should have access to air travel. It allows for opportunity. It allows for so many things in life are kind of tied to the ability to travel by air. And so we want to make sure we walk this line of making sure everyone in the value chain between the private sector and the public sector have done their part before we then look to consumers to participate.
Great. Thank you. Chairman again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The RINs credit that our chairman spoke about, that's the reason that we use ethanol gas in Georgia. Is there a way to take the RINs credits that Delta would have to offset some RINs that we could help get rid of ethanol fuel in Georgia, which is environmentally unsustainable? It's one of those things that it pollutes more. It creates a lot more problem for small engines. There's a lot of issues with using ethanol that are not good for the environment. And I'd love to see us get away from the introduction of ethanol fuel into our gasoline supply.
I think I'll answer it a slightly different way, and I will invite my colleagues who are coming after me to comment if anyone would like to comment on RINs as well. From the Delta perspective, I would say the major tie-in, of course, is that we do own a refinery that does need access to RINs. And so I think from us, from an ecosystem, the part of the SAF ecosystem, of course, is that there is a RINs credit out there, which in return our refinery needs. So a company like Delta is actually uniquely positioned to be able to negotiate and play in the SAF space because we know a lot about the RINs market. And to your point, we have our own opinions, I think separate in terms of exactly how we believe or that the RINs market should change and shape. But I agree. I just want to comment to you, Delta's expertise in the RINs space, I think would allow us to be a really good partner to the state as we think about, again, how RINs plays in the space or doesn't.
Thank you.
Yes. Chairman Goodman.
Just out of curiosity, what's the difference if there is no incentives at all? What is the difference between jet fuel and SAF price wise? Yep.
Thank you for that question, Senator. We typically quote 2 to 3 times the price of jet. I think the most easiest way to just think about it today is, and again, this is not exactly what the market looks like today, but sometimes if you're thinking about it, simple terms, gallon of jet is $3. So a gallon of SAF is $9. So you've got a $6 gap. You get $1.50 from federal. You get anywhere between 50 cents to $1 on RINs. And then you still need states to come in to, again, get that within, digestible. And then today it's in such small scale that that's an okay premium to carry. Obviously, as we move towards net zero, that would not work. But I think, again, that it's expected to come down the cost curve as we go, especially some of the modeling that Ben suggests, again, as these large scale SAFs, which woody biomass could be one of those. As those come in and scale, the cost curve comes down. The one that we talk a lot about today, the SAF that we use today is used cooking oil. That cost curve will never come down because used cooking oil can't be scaled. And so that's where we get really interested in what the state can do here, because that's a scalable bio-SAF or an e-SAF in the future. Those are both scalable, and that's where you can start to walk the cost curve down. So you wouldn't have to have incentives for forever.
Sure. Just out of curiosity, and I had this at something, obviously you're a public company, so I guess it's okay to ask, but I mean, what percentage of your total expenses is fuel? Do you know that right offhand?
I don't know the specific number. It kind of fluctuates between our number 1 or our number 2 cost driver based upon where fuel costs are at and where our human capital costs are at.
And final question, if that's sure. My understanding is the European Union is mandated.
Correct.
By 2030, is that correct?
It's actually starting in earnest next year.
So basically for Delta to be able to fly into Europe, you're going to have to be using this fuel, correct?
Correct.
And so you'll have to be using this fuel when you leave Europe as well, coming back to the United States, right? So any transatlantic flight's going to have to.
It's actually just out of Europe, just to clarify.
Just.
So just out of Europe, we will always have SAF on that plane.
I got you.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And again, it's an interesting, I like the way that Ben phrased it. I think we are watching the rest of the world bring these policies in play. I will say we do not believe the European model is the right model because of how it impacts consumers. To Ben's point, a mandate provides certainty for financing. So that's why you're seeing those plants get built in Europe faster than in the United States. So I think there's some conversations post next week we'll need to have about what, federal incentives look like. They're only 2-year incentives. And so since it takes 5 years to build a plant, that's not enough. But that's where states can really come in and make a difference. Because if there's that long-term incentive at the state level, that allows that underwriting of that facility to be much more secure. If you have what's at the state level, you can almost, whether it's an airline or a financier or even the producer, they can share that risk of the federal incentive or RENs, which fluctuates, or even the demand side. One of those needs to be stable and certain. And that's where, again, we've seen the state of Minnesota has a more long-term incentive, and that's helped partners of ours to be able to secure some financing or at least start those conversations.
Any other questions? Okay. Amelia, thank you for that presentation.
Thank
you
you.
for being here and giving us Delta's perspective on this. It's been very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, let's call on our friends at Gulfstream and Smitha Harahan, Vice President and Chief Sustainability Officer, and Jay Neely, you're with her. If I understand. You're the chauffeur for the day. All right, very good. Well, we're glad you're with us. Jay, thanks for being here. Smitha, you spoke at our last meeting, and thank you for doing that, and you're back again today. So I'll just turn the floor over to you.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the committee taking leadership on understanding and exploring how forestry and forestry byproducts of this great state can be used in SAF. I believe there's a lot of potential there. Thank you for the invite to bring Gulfstream's perspective to this committee. Last time, as you rightly pointed out, we talked about the science of sustainable aviation fuel. We talked about the different types of feedstocks, the techniques that can be used to convert that into fuel, and the different blends. And so today I'll be talking about sustainable aviation fuel from a business aviation perspective. Next slide, please. Of course. Thank you. So Gulfstream has a rich history of innovation. I mean, it started in 1958 when we flew our first Gulfstream 1. And since then, we've been leaders in designing, developing, manufacturing aircrafts, and then delivering them, and then continuing to service them through their life. Today, we have about 3,000 Gulfstreams in service. And so, we employ about 21,000 people here worldwide, and then about 13,000 of them are right here in the state of Georgia. And being a big payroll kind of contributor, we contribute about more than $1.2 billion. Saying all that, we continue to be leaders in this state and in this space. And so having said that, we have sustainability goals, and we support our industry's net zero goal by 2050. This is a goal that was established by the National Business Aviation Association, by the General Aviation Manufacturers Association, and the International Business Aviation Council. So 3 of our industry's leading bodies came together and put this goal. And what that means is, we have continued to commit to a 2% fuel efficiency year on year, starting from 2020 all the way to 2030. It also means that by 2050, the industry is going to be net zero. We also have our parent company, General Dynamics goal, and we're aligned there to reduce our CO2 by 40% by 2034. Both of this really requires a lot of innovation. So if you look at what does our sustainability journey entail, it's 3 focus areas. First, just the aircraft itself, our next generation fleet, which is currently what we are manufacturing and delivering. They're about 33% more fuel efficient than the predecessor models. So we're already working on that technology. We're looking at our operations and how we continue to lower the environmental impact of our operations today. That means lowering water usage, lowering our greenhouse gas emissions, both Scope 1 and 2. We're looking at waste production. How do we reduce that, and our energy consumption? And we're working very closely with our partners on that. So if we look at fuel, that is really the third lever that we have to pull, because we are aircraft manufacturers. We are And so to continue to look at that, we look at it in two ways. One, how do we procure sustainable aviation fuel for our own usage as we continue to test aircrafts? And we also look at how we can continue to test our aircraft's compatibility with greater blends of sustainable aviation fuel, where the sustainable aviation fuel is greater than the jet that we blend it with. So it's twofold with that. So if we look at just the demand for SAF, we have a number of companies that have very ambitious targets. Delta just talked about their target. We also have cargo hubs here in the Southeast that have fairly aggressive targets. And so if we look at the Science-Based Targets Initiative, which is a certification body, about 6,000 companies worldwide have certified targets, which means they have 70% reduction in CO2 within this decade and a net zero goal. Only then can you be certified by SBTi. Another 9,000 have commitments. They may not be as aggressive, but they have commitments. We have the Airports Council International that has, again, net zero 2050 target. And our own Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson Airport has a 2050 by net zero goal. Right. So in saying all that, we do expect, like, we've consumed about 4.5 billion gallons of jet fuel just here. If you look at the top 10 airports in the Southeast, this last year, we have consumed 4.5 billion gallons. That is set to increase 3 to 5% every year. So that is going up. Many airlines have committed to increasing their SAF commitment up to about 10% of their total fuel consumption. That's, again, EU mandates. Some of that is driven by that, and also their own decarbonization commitments. So the jet fuel is going up. And why SAF really becomes a big and important lever is that over the life cycle, as we talked about last time, the CO2 can be reduced by 60 to 80%. So it keeps us on that decarbonization path while we work on other slightly far away technologies that are yet to come into fruition. So if you look at it the short term, SAF is tangible. The other technologies are still in the pipeline and still under development. In the long term, even if other technologies do come into fruition, there are aircrafts that are developed, that are being delivered today, that will continue to be in service in the next 30 to 40 years. And so how do you decarbonize those? Are by using SAF as a drop-in fuel. And so there are certain blends of SAF that will work without any modification to the aircraft, which is why SAF in the long term still will continue to be a strong lever, is what we think. So if you look at, there are other fuels, of course, that are in play. I know Ben talked about a few. There are a few like hydrogen that are still under the talks, but these have not shown the safety or the promise of SAF just yet. And so SAF is really our tangible option for now. So if you look at why Georgia really has a role to play, the ground reality is that SAF will be converted, will be created with the feedstock that is available, with the technology that is most suitable for that feedstock, and with the infrastructure that is either available or incentivized. And so if you look at Georgia, the feedstock is here. There are plenty of co-processing infrastructure already in place or could be incentivized, like pulp mills. And this liquid can be converted, this pulp can be converted into liquid and then transported. And so I think if you look at two of those three, we have it, right? And then the technologies are still coming into fruition. If you look at Georgia, there's, I looked at our Forestry Commission report recently. They've ranked the 400 and odd top districts in terms of forestry being a contributor to GDP. And I have to say, in the top 20, I found 3 of our districts, right? District 1, District 2, and District 12. And then in the top 100, there were another 4 districts that came in. So GDP, when it comes to forestry, is very big for our state. So, and then a lot of these private ownership was 80% or more, which really speaks to me in the sense that we have like 22 million acres of private forest land. We have the best managed forest land in the state. Our forest organizations clearly address renewable forestry, the techniques, they talk about the certifications. And so if I just do a simple math based on what's available, I came up with 6 million dry tons per year purely from byproducts, right? I'm not even talking about the forest itself. This is purely byproducts. And with that, if I do a 40-gallon conversion per dry ton, 236 million gallons come from residues alone. So if we look at the grand challenge, I think Georgia is in a great place to fulfill a lot of that SAF production. The other, what can we do to further kind of support SAF in the state? One, I would say, is education. And education is not just about the SAF, the different feedstocks, the techniques, but also what does sustainable forest accounting look like? How do, the byproducts like sawdust, they're treated differently by the EPA. Just educating our entire value chain, whether it's the forest owners or the off-takers, that would be very helpful. The second piece is infrastructure evaluation and potential for reuse or repurpose of this infrastructure that's already in place in our state. And then lastly, just collaboration across this value chain, I think, will be tremendous to be able to accelerate our SAF production. If I were to look at the role of Gulfstream, as an original aircraft manufacturer, we have, like I said, two roles to play. One is using SAF in our own operations, and then being able to show compatibility of our aircrafts with increasing blends of SAF. We are involved in the ASTM committee that looks at the SAF, the certification of the SAF, the creation of SAF standards. And so being able to look into the future and get our future fleets ready for higher SAF blends is something that we're working on. We're also looking very closely on the environmental impacts of SAF versus jet. And so that's, again, demand signaling is something that we can do, being an off-taker right here in Georgia. But there are a couple of barriers where I think the state can really help us. And one is just the supply. Today's supply of SAF is very limited. And as Emilia was talking about, at these small percentages, it's still a viable option. As we go through our decarbonization journey, look for higher volumes, we are limited in where we can source that SAF. And the other piece is the cost. We're looking at 3 to 5 times jet versus SAF pricing. And so bringing that to more comparable levels will really help with uptick. And, we want to grow while we continue to decarbonize. And so that balance really has, SAF plays a key role, and we'd like the support to do that. So with that, I have answered any questions you may have.
Thank you, Samantha, for that. Any questions? Okay. Thank you for that presentation. And as I should say, for really all the companies that have such a significant presence in Georgia, thank you for Gulfstream as it has continued to grow, Jay, significantly in the state of Georgia. Y'all have chosen, as it has grown its business internationally, you've continued to make investments in Georgia and the facilities down on the coast. And so thank you for that. That's important for Georgia. We appreciate it. Thank you.
My cousin's actually head of security for Gulfstream.
All right. LanzaJet. Dane, good morning. Thank you for being with us, Director of Fuels Program and State and Local Affairs. And I hope at some point when you talk about locality, you'll talk about Soperton, Georgia, because that's just up the road from my little hometown of Adrian, Georgia, about 10 miles away. Good. Good.
So I want to talk a little bit about kind of, who LanzaJet is, what we're doing and what we're doing in Georgia. So again, thank you for letting me be here today. So the first thing is, we are a producer of SAF. And I think that's one of the most, but specifically, we are the world's first commercial producer of SAF from the alcohol to jet technology. Again, there's a lot of different ways to make jet fuel to make SAF, and we are pioneering the ethanol or alcohol to jet SAF. And so I think that's, and we're doing that specifically in Truland County in Soperton, Georgia. So, you know, our facility is able to make right now, currently was at 10 million gallons a year, of which 90% of that were expected to be SAF and probably 10% of that to be on-road diesel fuel. So that's kind of, you know, where we are doing that. So again, this is not a company that is, that we didn't arrive yesterday. We've been doing this for a while and been very part in developing this as a fuel. Obviously we had to start with a lab to make this new technology work. We moved into pilot scale. We worked with our partners in terms of the airline manufacturers to certify that, to be able to put it safely and accurately in those engines. Building our commercial plant, which we are in the process of actually today going through startup and commissioning. So we hope to have fuel coming out the back imminently. And then beyond that, how can we then grow that platform? And once we've shown that worked and really kind of expand that into a more global, you know, international sort of. Wouldn't that have been awesome if that worked? There we go. I just got to push it hard, apparently very hard. Again, so we're not doing this alone. One of the key parts of our journey is the investor partners that we have that are going on this ride with us. And those names are diverse and unique, and they represent every part of the supply chain. They represent people who help us actually make the feedstock, to move it around, to produce it, to consume it, to fly it in their airplanes, and then the customers who fly on the back of the airplane. So we're excited that we've got that full picture of players who are interested in trying to develop SAF, specifically alcohol to jet SAF. One of the things that we want to, talk about is, it is aviation is important, or making sustainable aviation is important because it's 3% of all the transportation emissions that exist globally. And as we talked about, aviation is growing, it's not going anywhere, and it's on an upward trajectory. And so we need to make sure that as we're doing that, it is a sustainable aspect. And I think that's one of the things I like to talk about. Technically, SAF means synthetic aviation fuel. And so synthetic meaning it doesn't come from the normal way of crude oil refining. The S for sustainable then is how do we layer that on top of that and make it then a net positive aspect to reduce some of those emissions that we're talking about. Because just making something synthetic but not having it where it's actually positive doesn't actually accomplish stuff. So there's a lot of these regulations and rules and targets that are associated, not just making it synthetically like an alcohol to jet technology does, but then what are the feedstocks that we use? What is the process energy used? What is the mechanism that we get that fuel from wherever it needs to be blended into that airplane? So we make that as efficient and sustainable, both carbon reduction and efficient and in that regard. So I think that's one of the things that's really an important distinction that I always like to really talk about. Where are we in the journey? There's 100 billion gallons of fossil jet demand globally. We are currently, as a globe, making 160 M gallons of SAF. We have a very long way to go. And I think that's been highlighted by others who are talking about we're a small fraction and how does that play out? And I think that small fraction is a really important thing that we need to get bigger to really make that sustainable impact that we're talking about. And this is, where are we in the globe that people are paying attention to this sustainable aviation journey? It really is, airplanes fly internationally and extra market and globally. And so therefore we have to pay attention to where the different levers, flying into someplace, flying out of something, those have to align at some level. Otherwise you're going to have misaligned targets and unsupported growth and unsupported trajectory. Again, we're strong in the United States in terms of people paying attention to it. We're producing it. Our customers, our airlines are paying attention to it. And we have policies that are trying to do that. And so we're seeing other things emerge globally. And we think that's going to be an important part of the journey and how we can continue to support that strong support, both politically and commercially here in the United States specifically. I don't get that one. So again, let's talk about SAF. Carbon is a proxy for energy, right? Carbon exists in crude oil. They take that crude oil, that energy, that carbon out of the ground, they refine it, they turn it into fuel, and it makes the planes go, right? The after result of that energy being is carbon in the air that was there before. So as we're taking carbon out of the ground and putting it in the air, that's the unsustainable part of the traditional fuel energy. First off, there's only a finite amount in the ground. We found more of it. We keep finding more of it, but there's still only a finite amount. Number two, we're taking what was underground and putting it in the air, and that changes the balance of where that stuff was. What the biggest benefit of sustainable aviation fuel is taking, instead of new carbon out of the ground, taking carbon that exists already and putting that in our energy cycle. The easiest way, or the most common way that most of these technologies do that, is through the biologic source, right? Plants are great at taking carbon dioxide energy out of the air and turning it into something else. So many of the different sustainable aviation pathways rely on some sort of biogenic input. The plants did the hard work of getting that carbon captured. Then you refine that, you turn that into some sort of energy, a jet fuel specifically, and it can go in the airplane, and it can go, and then its after effects, the carbon that it leaves behind, are then available to be reused by some of those same plants and animals and things that are going to consume that carbon dioxide. So that cycle, that complete circle where it completes the loop, is what makes the sustainable aviation fuel, and how you can deal with that. And again, there's lots of different pathways to get there. The alcohol to jet one is kind of that second slide. You'll see the current commercial one is the HEFA, and that's kind of the bottom one that's kind of flatlined. We see these other technologies really being able to take advantage of more of those opportunities and really have a bigger growth pattern. Our technology specifically will take ethanol as an input, an alcohol, and we'll turn that into then an ethylene as an intermediate step. And then, like Legos or Tinker Toys, we link those things together and then make a jet fuel molecule that can then come out and do that sort of thing. So we're excited about that technology. And again, as we talked about, 90% of that comes out as jet fuel if we design the inputs and the twist the knobs and the pressure conditions to come out to jet. And diesel comes out at the bottom. And I'll come back to that a little bit more in a second. Another thing, Senator, again, you were talking about, ethanol. How do we get that out of gasoline? One of the things that's important there is right now there's 17 billion, with a B, gallons of ethanol that's consumed or that's produced in the United States, most of it going into the gasoline market or export market. If we were to take those 17 billion gallons of ethanol, instead of putting them in the gasoline market and convert that into the SAF, that is going to be almost 10, 11 billion gallons of jet fuel that can come out of that. And what's important is cars and gasoline is fairly easy to decarbonize. We have electric solutions. I rented an electric car to come here today, right? Those are possible. And as that continues to grow, we've got that potential demand destruction for that ethanol need in the gasoline pool. Well, how can we pivot that into a hard to decarbonize sector like aviation? We think is a really exciting and good opportunity that we want to continue to lean into. And again, we as a technology don't care where the ethanol comes from for the synthetic part of the SAF. Any kind of alcohol, it's ethanol, can make that process go. But we as a sustainable aviation producer then are looking for making sure that ethanol comes from the most efficient, the best crops, the best production process to get there that we're looking at. So again, we as, trying to grow and trying to scale this up. So some of the things that we really have to analyze and look at, obviously our technology piece, we're in control of that and we're running with that. But the policy is one of those things that we really need to understand specifically, and how those different policies layer to some extent. And I think one of the things that I like to tell people is, there really is a three-legged stool that can support SAF or sustainable aviation fuel coming in and displacing the traditional thing. The first one is, what are your raw materials that are coming in, right? How can you either promote those, help, logistically gather those, make those more economical, and getting those inputs in. And so whether, for our case, that would be what ethanols are available through, those biologics to get there. The second one is kind of the production and logistics of it. How do we go through, and that's, do you give an incentive to a facility to come in and build in your state or produce in your state, whether that be through a tax incentive or a labor cost or power service, discounts, whatever that might be, or like Delta is really leading in Minnesota, having like a hub that can come in and aggregate that fuel and get the jet and the SAF together and blend it in a location that can get to the airplane. The third thing you'll see is, how do you incentivize the customers to buy that stuff by potentially lowering the cost, which is some of those tech programs that exist, whether they be tax credits, whether they be like RIN programs or things that exist in that bit. And so you don't have to do all three as a state to go and accomplish that. You can pick one that best fits your lane. And I think that's one of the things that we really are excited about. And so one of the things that I think is important to highlight for us, and this is example that we've used and we've shared with some folks at the EPA level about the difference between diesel and jet. I'm a music major. I count to 4 and start over again. So I'm not going to get deep into the refining chemistry of all this, but Jet and diesel are very similar fuels and are usually produced at the same place using substantially similar technologies. So a producer who can make SAF can very easily and make diesel, and vice versa. So the question is, how do we as a refiner tweak our knobs and our process conditions to pivot one to SAF or one to renewable diesel? What's important to note in the United States particularly is many of the policies that we have in place to promote low carbon energy, low carbon fuels are focused on-road transportation fuels as their primary purpose. That is a more mature goal, a more mature programs that exist for that. So as you'll see, if we're going to produce the same gallon of fuel under these example kind of costs, it is actually economically more advantageous to produce on-road diesel than it is to produce an SAF for an airline. And part of that's because there are different tax structures, because there's different tariffs, because there's different incentives, because there's different taxes of the base fuel, and also different costs of the base fuel. So one of the things that we as a producer have to do is we've made a decision as LanzaJet to really prioritize aviation fuel. If we were a complete rational economic player, we would make diesel all day long. So one of the things that we need as a policy certainty and a policy trajectory is how can we get those same sort of fuels even? And so some of that is just piggybacking on existing on-road things, maybe putting things like either multipliers or increasers or extra things, thumb on the scale for those. Or is there different SAF sort of policy incentives that exist that will try to make a producer shift into the hard to decarbonize SAF aspect, as opposed to the generic, we already have a pathway on-road diesel fuel stuff. I would say the other thing that I would say as an option for Georgia to really look into is the aggregation and logistics of it. As complicated as SAF is to make and to get commercially viable, it's actually harder to then get it blended in with the jet fuel and into the airplane, just because of the way the incumbent logistics exist. They're already, we've got many more gallons of fossil jet fuel, many more producers who have a lot bigger balance sheets who are producing jet fuel, and they control those ways of blending and moving their traditional jet fuel. Not necessarily excited and interested in introducing something they don't make into their pathway that they control. So I think that's part of why I'm excited to watch things like Delta is doing in Minneapolis, where they're having that hub together. We're creating a blending, they're creating the people on the supply chain to get that full blending infrastructure to make that blended gallon feasible to get into that airplane. So I think that's another option that I think is an important barrier to, once the fuel's produced, to actually getting it consumed in there. So I would, again, encourage that as a secondary point to highlight. And the third thing I will say is, LanzaJet is really grateful. Recently, we just got some IRA money for a fast graph from the FAA, which is going to help us expand some of our capacity at Lanza, at Soperton, at the facility, Freedom Pines. So having ability to come in and take those sorts of grants to be able to expand our capacity, to give us more flexibility in what our raw materials coming in is an important thing that we can look at. And is that potentially an opportunity that we can further expand to help on that production leg of the stool? And again, this is just a picture of us at our grand opening we had earlier this year. This is before everything was going in hot. So we had a bunch of people come in and visit it, take a look. And so we're excited because that really is happening today, that we are making jet fuel imminently, and we're going to be able to be producing that in Georgia. And we're proud to have that as an opportunity there. So I'd love to answer any other questions from our producer's perspective.
Great. Dane, thank you for that presentation. Chairman, again, you have a question?
I do. I appreciate your presentation. One of the things when we talk about ethanol, there's no pipeline out there that puts ethanol in their pipeline. It has to be delivered by truck because it's so costly. The SAF that you're formulating and generating there, could it be transported a pipeline without any difficulty?
Yes. Yes. SAF is physically jet fuel. So any place jet fuel can go, SAF can go. So we take the caustic hydroscopic properties of ethanol and get rid of those and turn it into the properties of regular jet fuel.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yep, Chairman Goodman.
I've been told that that forestry products have a better ratio, so to speak, in terms of reducing emissions, that you can use less fuel that is made from forest products to get to the achieved goal versus, say, some other agronomic crops. Is that correct or no?
No, I mean, a pound or a ton of fuel has a certain amount of carbon, and that's what we're trying to measure. What makes forestry products interesting and attractive from a sustainability perspective is that we're looking at using the sawdust and the tops and the trimmings and the waste, so that we're not actually looking to take the primary product, which is still wood, which is still going to go in wood products and paper products, right? So we're trying to take whatever the stuff that you would otherwise throw away and not use or burn or that kinds of stuff, and put that to a good beneficial energy use. So in the sustainability accounting, if you can use a secondary waste residue product, then you don't have the cost of growing the tree associated with the cost of growing your waste and residues, which gives it a better carbon reduction relative to the alternatives. So that's the main reason why you see a lot of attractiveness of cellulosic or second generation crops. We're not growing them or purpose grown crops. We're not trying to take corn necessarily and turn it into stuff. We're trying to take the stalks and the cobs and the other part of corn. We're not trying to take the sugar. We're trying to take the bagasse, the woody part. We're not taking the trunk of the tree, the tops and the thinnings and the sawdust is what we're excited about being the interesting, sustainable form of that waste and residue ethanol.
Yeah, one more.
In terms, is there a silver bullet out there in the science part of this, or is there, when you're trying to make this where it's more economically advantageous, do you see in the near term, or is that what we're looking at the long term in terms of the technological advances of making this more?
Yeah. So this is something our CEO, Jimmy Smartis, really talks about a lot. There are a million ways to make SAF. And everybody's got a slightly different mousetrap to be able to do it. And a lot of R&D money, and specifically government R&D money, is going to find the next mousetrap or the next better way of doing it. And we support all that because we want it to be done the best. But the time is now, someday is now, right? And so I think at some point, what we're excited about doing is not making it better. We're taking what we have and really making it captured today. A ton of carbon saved today is significantly more important than a ton of carbon saved 10 years from now. And so we're actually interested in deploying and getting that done today. And so that's why the HEFA technology, our alcohol to jet technologies, those are there. And to the extent we can lean into those and get those actual today gallons in the jet, while still not ignoring the new and developing guys. But if we just wait till we get it perfect, we'll be waiting until I'm old and not ready to fly anymore, right? So I think that's the biggest message that we like to talk about. Someday really is now. We're not poo-pooing anybody else, but we're saying if we're going to lean into something, let's lean into something that can make today's difference and not tomorrow's hopefully differences.
Dane, I think we've got one final question. Chairman Walker, did you have a question?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dane, thank you for being here. And I want to thank you for the investment your company has made in Truton County and in Senate District 20. I wanted the audience to be aware, and I wanted to thank you and brag on LanzaJet. You all have been a fantastic community partner already in Truton, and during the aftermath of Hurricane Helene, I understand that your company provided numerous large generators to basically power the water system for Soapton and for other needs. And I want to thank you for that generosity and neighbors helping neighbors. And maybe you would like to speak to that real briefly, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. And thank you for thanking us. I mean, the short answer is that's our community, right? Those are our neighbors. Those are our workforce. Those are our friends. Those are our families. And, one of our core messages is to be sustainable. You can't just be about, you have to be all encompassing sustainable, and being sustainable is making your community, making your partnership, viable. And so we were glad to be part of that community and glad to contribute that effort. It kicked us in the teeth too, but it kicked other folks in the teeth harder. And we want to make sure that if we're going to spend the time and effort and money to build a big plant that's going to do good things, we want it to do good things, not just for jet people, but local people too.
Thank you.
Great. Dane, thank you for that very much. And thanks for your continued investment in Georgia. And thanks for the presentation.
Thank you for your time.
All right, with that, we're going to take a short 15-minute break to give everyone a bathroom break. And I think with the generosity of Delta that we got lunch boxes in the back. So grab a lunch box, come back in. We're really going to start at 1:05 sharp. We're going to stick this to 15 minutes, and then we're going to resume. We've got 2 more speakers to hear from, and then we'll conclude and we'll be done. So I apologize if this is running a little bit longer than expected, but I appreciate the presentations and how thorough they have been and the questions that we've received from the committee. So Katie, any other instructions for us you want to?
Different sandwiches out there. They all have chips and cookies.
Okay, great. Oswald, anything we need to know? Okay, great. All right, we're going to take a 15-minute break. We'll resume at 1:05 p.m. Thank you.
My sitter is just called in sick while we were sitting here. So, but my daughter gets out of school at 10:15. So
We've only got two more.
Okay. I'm just telling you, I gotta leave at like 10:02.
Totally get it.
Then-
We'll be done before then. Thank you. All right, we're going to resume now, and I apologize that we're running a little bit late, but in pilot lingo, we are on base turning for final. So we've got two more presenters. And I want to thank Chris Clark. Thank you for being here. President and CEO of the Georgia Chamber, is at the forefront of Georgia's economic evolution and driving prosperity and growth for our businesses in all sectors. Chris, I really appreciate your presence here and appreciate your perspective. So with that, I'm going to turn the mic over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity. I tell you, I'm the generalist here after listening to all the experts. So Josh and I are going to back clean up, but talk a little more broadly about economic development. And I think maybe a couple of data points that might help y'all as y'all work through this. But I do think, I appreciate what you're doing. I think it's interesting when you can get me and Will and Frank and Brittany all in the same room at the same time. You know, you hit an industry sector that matters across a broad sector. So what I want to do is just share a little bit about where we are from an economic development standpoint, and then talk a little bit about the future as you think about this particular issue, maybe a way to think about how it impacts some other sectors out there. So I'll just jump right into this. This jumps around on me, so I'm going to give you a minute to catch up. Okay, so I want to brag on Governor Kemp and the Department of Economic Development for a minute. My slides look really weird up here. This is not our normal graphic, but we'll move with it. But here's the most important part. We've had 2,800 announcements in the last 6 years under Governor Kemp. 2,800 expansions, new companies moving to Georgia. This is not counting economic gardening or small business. These are all major employers moving to Georgia. Those employers, those 2,800 companies are going to invest about $154 billion. LanzaJet is one of those, and we appreciate that investment. Those companies are going to create and need to hire about 360,000 Georgians over the next 3 years as they ramp up their operations. And so what I love about this, though, is that 83% of that economic activity is happening in rural Georgia. It's happening in the Sopertons of the world. And that's not saying that Atlanta's not getting their share, because we are. It's just we've grown the pie thanks to the right policies and the right commitment by the governor and the leadership over the last few years. So again, I really apologize. These are, something's happened with our slide deck here, but we try to show you. These are supposed to be graphics of a lot of the companies that we've got, but literally in every corner of the state of Georgia, we've seen that economic activity. In particularly, the four areas where the Department of Economic Development and the general economy has seen the biggest growth, obviously in the data center space. Now, you say, well, why would I even bring up data centers now? Well, data centers need one critical thing to operate: energy. And you're talking about an energy that if we can move this product over here, that would free up a product in this other area, or look at what biomass can do. And so huge energy consumer for the state, and it will be for the future because of what the consumers want. But we're seeing the benefit from that. A lot of investment in clean tech. We're doing a new task force just to look at clean tech workforce in Georgia, starting a little bit later this year. Food processing is up, particularly in rural Georgia. And then obviously moving the goods and products all over Georgia to ports all over the world shows that our logistics and distribution up just this year alone almost 30%. And so as we look at the next couple of years, I think you can expect to see all four of these sectors in particularly continue to grow, even if the greater economy globally starts to slow down a little bit, which we all expect it to do. I also don't want to neglect the fact that a lot of that investment in Georgia is being driven by foreign direct investment. And so making sure that, and I think that's a critical role of state and federal government, to make sure that markets are open and we're an attractive state to companies from all over the world. A lot of investment, obviously, from Korea, what we've seen with Hyundai, their suppliers, Qcells, SK, but a lot of great investments in the last year from Germany, Canada, Switzerland, as well. But here's my here's one of the couple of slides that I think really matter. And I think, Russ, particularly for you, we want all those big companies to come to Georgia. The ripple effect is big, but there's a lot more going on. And so let me share just a couple of slides about rural Georgia in particular. What we've seen in the last 6 years now is a 25% growth in small businesses in rural Georgia. Now, when I gave the similar presentation in 2015, we had expected and projected those numbers of small businesses to decrease. But you've seen this renaissance in rural communities led by a lot of these companies, led by some of the policy you guys have enacted, whether it's for tax credits or for our healthcare systems. And so huge number there. And we've also seen a 30% increase in jobs in rural Georgia. Again, 2015 did this talk. We were expecting about a 10% decrease overall in job growth. And so the policies that you implement do make a difference, and it is resonating. Here's what we've also seen. Investment in rural Georgia has grown from about $10 billion in annual economic development to over $20 billion just this last year alone. Our local cities and counties should be doing better because we've pumped about 15% more into their local economies and their local tax bases. And I think when you really care about the men and women, if you love God and you love people, you care about those people on the bottom end. And what we've seen in poverty in Georgia has actually gone down statewide, but it's also gone down particularly in rural Georgia. Again, 5 years ago, those numbers were expected to increase by about 2 to 3%. Instead, they're decreasing. And so all of this economic activity is having multiple benefits far beyond just job creation and what we might talk about in a regular setting. But let me shift gears and talk just for a minute here about the future and then land the plane with a little talk about policy. We are expecting too, because of this economic growth, to see population increase in our rural communities as well. Obviously, the state of Georgia is going to add several million people over the next 25 years. Metro Atlanta is going to do great. Nobody's worried about Metro Atlanta continuing to grow. Our hub communities, which are those non-Atlanta MSAs like Savannah, Columbus, Augusta, Valdosta, Rome, Athens, they're going to still see some growth, maybe not as robust as Atlanta, but really the turnaround again has been rural Georgia. These projects are bringing folks back, and young folks, particularly after COVID, decided that they wanted a different quality of life. And we saw downtowns being revitalized in South Georgia, and we saw men and women coming back. And then what that's going to do for us long-term as we look 25 years out to 2050, you're going to see some significant job growth, about a 35% job growth in Metro Atlanta. Rural Georgia, though, almost 32% job growth. And so we can keep doing this, and the trend lines are there for us, but it all comes down to the policies that you look at, whether it's on jet fuel or what we've talked about today or the broader picture. Part of our goal is to make sure we're the best place to do business for the next 11 years, right? And that falls on our policy. So let me hit 2 quick slides here for you. We have spent the last year traveling the state of Georgia, every corner, talking to business leaders, elected leaders, surveying, polling, asking them what their threats are, what we need to focus on to make sure that as we look for the next 25 years, we are well positioned to keep this growth going. And here's what we heard. A lot of worry right now, whether it's inflation, whether it's trade wars, the rise of populism, this shift of debate from the federal level to the state level. This is front of mind to every business leader out there. In particular, even before Hurricane Helene, we saw extreme weather events, basically from what happened last year with Idalia and Michael a couple of years before, but there's a lot of worry out there, both in the ag sector, but in the manufacturing sector about this rise of extreme weather. So we looked at all of these different threats, where the opportunities were. We surveyed, we talked to folks about what do we need to focus on to help every community in Georgia and every business in Georgia grow for the next 25 years. And we came away with 5 pillars, which are not prosperity pillars, but prosperity pillars, if the slide looked appropriate. But let me unpack these for you quickly. And this will be part, Mr. Chairman, of our new strategic plan that we'll actually announce at Eggs and Issues in January. And if you haven't got your tickets, they'll be coming. So here's what the business community says we need to focus on. Number 1, talent and workforce. Obviously, we're doing a lot of work in that space, and we can spend hours talking about it. Number two is a focus on innovation and entrepreneurship. How do we grow our own, keep our own? And part of that innovation sector that we heard over and over again was kind of like what you're talking about today. How do we look at Georgia commodities, Georgia products, and look for new markets for them? How do we help men and women innovate, work with our university system, and the need to create more regulatory sandboxes at the state level to let new opportunities, new technologies flourish and thrive. You guys have done that with a couple of sectors. I would encourage you and argue that we ought to have a dozen plus regulatory sandboxes. And maybe this is one of those sectors. How do we continue to help forestry and ag grow? So that's a critical area as you think about what you're doing here. Obviously, competitiveness and economic development, a lot of concerns right now over potential trade wars. I think whatever you guys do to help us open markets, keep markets open, plug us in, tell that story, what the Department of Economic Development does every day with their, Josh, how many international offices do you have now? 13 international offices. Funding those offices, keeping them open and connecting them with Georgia farmers and manufacturers is going to be critical. I'd also mention, because I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't, when we talk about competitiveness and economic development, we have to do something about tort reform. We have to address tort reform, lawsuit abuse. We have to bring down the price of insurance, which I'll mention it, and you need to take I think you have to take this perspective. Jake brought up the impact of Helene. Spent a lot of time over the last month now talking to my peers in other states, working with Georgia businesses. Mark Wilson, who's the chamber president in Florida, said, when you start having events like we had with Helene, you can see a long-term impact what we've had in Florida with the collapse of the insurance market, what you're seeing in California because of those extreme weather events. And so if we want to support our farmers, if we want to support manufacturers and small businesses, dealing with tort reform and lowering those insurance rates and making sure we've got the right providers in Georgia is going to be critical. The fourth area, infrastructure, obviously working on, we need $84 billion in roads and bridges and railroad infrastructure to move these products to market all over. But we also need to make sure that we've got the right energy infrastructure. And finally, regional prosperity, making sure every community in Georgia has the same opportunity to grow and have healthy communities. And so whether this is through how you incentivize these companies, lower the regulatory barriers, keep the markets open, those are all areas that we're going to work on you with the folks in this room as we go into the next session. So just doing that quick because I'm setting it up for Josh because I want him to look great and take all the glory here. But happy to answer any questions from the panel.
Thank you, Chris. Any questions? Great job,
easy.
Chris. Thanks for your leadership and
Yes.
what the chamber continues to do for Georgia business, not just Atlanta, but for all of Georgia. You've been
Georgia
focused
Chamber.
on that. I remember that presentation in 2015 when you talked about an anticipated decrease of small business, and that was a troubling message that you sent. And thank goodness, with good leadership and a lot of things that the chamber has done, that number's positive now and not negative.
Right. My board called that the depression tour that year. So I'm trying to give the good news now. So
Yeah.
thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. All right. All right, finally, Josh Stevens. Welcome, sir, Georgia Department of Economic Development. Thank you. And you're our last speaker, but we've saved the best for last. How about that? We put it that way. Thank you to you and your department. Pat Wilson, Commissioner, reached out to me, and I know he had anticipated, and this was scheduled, but he got pulled away with something that was unavoidable. And I appreciate him letting us know that, and I appreciate him sending you so that you can let us know what you guys think about what we're working on.
Yes, sir. No, thank you very much. And thank you for the opportunity. Pro Tem Kennedy, thank you, Chairman Goodman, Senator Halpern, and Senator Ginn, even though he has already left. And is Chairman Walker still online? We'll say hey to him as well. But
Yes, he is. Thank you.
thank you again, Pro Tem Kennedy, for the opportunity. And really, what we want to do here is just add a few things. You've heard from some excellent Georgia businesses on their stories, their growth, and really the reasons why they've invested here in the state. And what we have to offer is just some additional comments about why the state is in the position that it is, as far as the number one state for business, but also some of the other aspects of why Georgia's continued to be a leader in successful and economic development. So over the course of the last few weeks and months in the off season here, we've been tracking the activity of this committee, but also noticed that there was a lot of conversations going on around the forestry and agricultural industries this off season. And we thank you for what you're doing to identify support and opportunities within those groups, especially as it relates to the impacts from Hurricane Helene. Our organization was also involved in the recovery and response efforts, working alongside GEMA and others to ensure state agencies and community partners had what they needed in terms of support for information and resources from the business community statewide to the business community statewide. So we're proud of all of the state's #1 rankings, particularly the state's #1 industry of agriculture, in all the categories of the forestry industry where we're also ranked in the top spot in the nation. So there's also a #1 that we're very proud of, which I'm going to get into, and that's being the #1 state for business for 11 years in a row. So what I plan to do is just cover a few broad reasons and give you a brief economic development update on what's been going on as it relates to jobs and investment around the state. So next slide. Many of you know who we are, what we do, but just for a perspective on all the different industries and ways in which we support the state, we are working within multiple sectors, from the arts and film and tourism and international relations and trade to business development. So we've got people all over the globe, all over the state, who are working to support businesses and provide resources and information to help Georgia companies grow and invest here in the state. So one thing I want to mention here, you see the incentives guide, but you also see our #1 ranking here and some of the factors that play into that. But not for the partnership and support of the General Assembly and decades of strong and consistent leadership at the executive level, as well as all the collaborations that we have with our other state agencies, we would not be in the position that we are today as it relates to the #1 state for business and seen as a national leader in many facets of economic development. So at a high level, these are some of the basic foundations of what make a state a good place to do business, but also a good place to invest in general as it relates to the state's bond rating, as well as the fully funded rainy day fund and a low corporate state income tax. Also, the single factor apportionment. Those are all basics that play into the fact that we are being evaluated by companies, but also consultants and individuals. So those are some of the very basics. But as we get into some of the top reasons within the Site Selection magazine why Georgia is the #1 state for business, there's really several categories, and we've been in the top 10 in several subcategories for many years. But available workforce, the cost of doing business, cooperative and responsive state government, energy availability and costs, logistics and infrastructure, and site readiness programs. But also I want to put a plug in for our partners at the Technical College System and Quick Start. They have been ranked the #1 workforce training program for as long as the rankings have existed. So they've been #1 longer than we've been #1 as a state. So I want to make sure that their successes are recognized there too. Really skipping into the facts as it relates to our logistics and infrastructure. One of the categories where we've been consistently ranked high is the strategic location and logistics infrastructure that the state has invested in over many years. Whether it's the location, access to international importing and exporting through our ports, or efficiently moving goods via rail, air, or road, Georgia stands apart in the southeast of the nation. Again, this goes back to visionary investments made by the General Assembly and state leaders seeing the future and planning for it. So skipping into, so really what I'm going to hit on here, two main sectors. We're looking at trade, and then we'll look at global commerce and trends on jobs and investment. Over the last 3 years, we've continued to set records in trade, and we're focusing specifically on exports. These are goods, products that companies in Georgia are making and sending abroad. So we've got 3 years, as I mentioned, 3 years in a row of records, but also in exports overall in the U.S. in 2023, they were contracting. But exports in Georgia have achieved sustained growth for the last decade, increasing 26%. Some of our largest trade partners include Canada, Mexico, China, Germany, Singapore, the Netherlands, Belgium, Japan, and the UAE. Currently, Georgia ranks 12th among U.S. states for dollar value of exports And our export growth in 2023 was led by global aerospace and defense sales, which has increased 20% compared to 2022. And our state ranks 5th in the U.S. for aerospace exports. Gulfstream, of course. Aerospace products remains Georgia's #1 export in terms of dollar value at $11.1 billion. But our second category is motor vehicles, which is coming in at about $4.1 billion. In the Port of Brunswick also announced a record year for automotives in 2023. So some of the top markets for those would be Canada, the UAE, China, Mexico, and Germany. But I don't want to exclude the fact that our agricultural exports also exceeded $5.8 billion in 2023. Some of the top customers for those were China, Canada, Mexico, Pakistan, and Turkey. And our poultry exports also increased by 4%, totaling $1.6 billion. Other leading products include cotton, forestry products, and peanuts. And I want to skip to the next slide here to show you a little bit of the trends. So we talked about the last 3 years of export activity in the records, but as you can see, between 2013 and 2020, we ranged from 35 to about $41 billion. But then there was an uptick in 2021 from 42 to 47 to 49. So you'll see a similar trend when I skip into the global commerce, jobs, and investment numbers as well, a marked uptick in economic activity in those years. So I segued there into this is our global commerce team's activity, and that's the team that's working statewide doing business recruitment, but we've also got a team of individuals who are working with the existing industries across the state. Their job is to visit with companies from all areas within their territory. Many of them have 10 or more counties, and we divide the state similar to how DCA and others do. We have 12 different regions. So those folks are focused on connecting with businesses throughout the state. So as we look at FY24, 429 project locations, over $20 billion in investment, and nearly 27,000 jobs. So this only includes projects that we worked. So this is not taking into account private sector activity that may have occurred with other companies or individuals that we were not working with. Here we go. Next slide here is looking at some trends too. You know, as we talked about the trade uptick in 21 to 23, you also see a similar trend between in FY22 and FY23, whereby we had over 51,000 jobs and 38,000 jobs. And last year, we're back to a more normalized number in FY24 of nearly 27,000. But when you look at the investment, you can see that the investment has continued to stay high. That is a product of higher levels of costs, but also investment, perhaps automation or other ways in which companies are making investments in capital equipment. So skipping to some of the top projects from FY24, just want to give you guys a general synopsis of some of the top projects in the last year, but you see the return of several office projects. But in addition to those, you've got a pretty good scattering of projects throughout the rest of the state. And I'm going to hit on trends within new projects and existing locations as well, but we'll also get into rural economic development, some of those numbers for different areas around the state over a period of time too. So just want to give you a good synopsis there. But when we talk about the 429 locations, if you look at a percentage of the number of projects outside of the Metro Atlanta area, which is the 10 core counties here in Metro Atlanta, but 83% or 357 out of the 429 projects were located outside of Metro Atlanta. 68% or 18,000 of the 26,900 jobs were located outside of Metro Atlanta. And then you fast forward to the investment, you've got $12.5 billion or 62% of the nearly $20 billion invested outside of the Metro Atlanta area. So one other fact that we'd like to look at is what is the percentage of new job creation and investment that occurs from companies who are already here and continue to invest in the state versus new projects and new jobs created. So you can see here that expansions accounted for 72% of the overall project locations, and the new jobs and investment were actually higher when you look at when you look at new versus existing locations. So we'll skip on to the next one. And this is something that we have really been working hard to keep track of over time. And we've just now gotten to where we have about 10, we switched from our data platforms, and we've have about 10 to 12 years of Salesforce data now that we can pull from and really look at communities and counties that we worked with over an extended period of time. And what you see here is a map that is displaying the state's rural counties. So you have 118 out of 159 you have 118 out of 159 counties with a population of 50,000 or less, classified as rural by most definitions. But that translates to about 74% of our state's counties. So when you look around and we're talking economic development in rural areas, this map is a symbolism of the jobs that we have worked with within our project pipeline over the last 10 years. So you definitely see some areas of the state that have seen growth and will continue to see growth over that period of time. So I just want to add one more caveat that this does not incorporate all private sector activity. It's just those projects that we've worked with over time. But we also skip into that same data set over the last 10 years in rural economic development. We've worked with we have project activity or job creation activity in 154 out of 159 counties. So there are still 5 counties that we're working to support. And each and every day, we want to make sure that's absolutely something that we want to see as a fully filled in map. And, you know, the data can be spliced how it is, but we're looking at a 10-year period, and there are still some areas that we can be working with. So, and with that, I will yield for any questions. I know that's a lot of data and information related to state's investment. And hopefully the caboose role here was fulfilled, but thank you.
Yes, and very helpful. Any questions? No. Josh, thank you for that. And I will say to you and for the crowd and those listening, the kind of numbers you're talking about, those of us up here like to recite about the success of Georgia's economic development and projects coming in and 11 years straight, doesn't just happen. It happens because of good leadership and so much of that because of what ECD does. And I appreciate that, as all of us legislators do. And on a personal note, I've had the opportunity to take 2 international economic development missions with your department. And when you do that, you get to see firsthand what a first-class, professionally run economic development organization we have representing Georgia. It is second to none. It's why you see the results that you have and that we have and that we get to enjoy. And so I thank you for that. And thanks for your continued leadership. And that just continues to keep the engine running back home for what y'all are doing for us internationally and of course across the country. So thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right, great. Okay. With that, we are at the time. I think I can ask all of you to put away your tray tables and bring your seat backs to their full upright position. And I will ask Katie. Katie, thank you for hosting us today. Thanks for Delta's generosity. Thanks for lunch. Thanks for giving us this the room that we've had. This has been just perfect. Thanks for all of you. All of the presenters have been spot on. I couldn't do this, and if I did, it wouldn't mean anything, but I didn't have my committee members that are here that you see, as well as Chairman Walker, who zoomed in and is still with us, and appreciate his participation. So with that, I need to turn it to Charlie and ask my office boss if there's anything else we need to talk about or any announcements before we land the plane. That's the last reference I'll make.
Sir, you are clear to land.
All right. With that, thank you for being here. We're adjourned. Thanks.